The studio lights of the View glowed brighter than usual that morning, casting a polished sheen over the round table where opinions so often clashed. Producers moved briskly behind the cameras, whispering into headsets, sensing something electric in the air. The audience, already seated, buzzed with anticipation. There was a guest today who carried a reputation that preceded him, not for volume, but for precision. Thomas Sowell sat quietly at the edge of the table, hands folded neatly, posture relaxed yet dignified. His expression was calm, almost contemplative, as if he were observing the room rather than participating in it. Decades of scholarship, debates, and public discourse had shaped him into someone who no longer needed to dominate space to command attention. His silence alone felt weighty. Across from him, Whoopi Goldberg leaned back in her chair, scanning her cue cards with a practiced confidence. She had moderated countless discussions, weathered controversies, and sparred with guests from all ends of the ideological spectrum. Yet today, there was a subtle tension in her jaw, a flicker of impatience she tried to mask with humor. The host introduced Sowell with measured enthusiasm, listing his accomplishments: economist, philosopher, author of countless influential books. The audience applauded respectfully, some more vigorously than others. Sowell nodded politely, acknowledging the applause without soaking it in. "Dr. Sowell," Whoopi began, smiling tightly, "you've written extensively about society, economics, and culture. Some people say your views are controversial." Sowell's lips curved into the faintest smile. "Truth often is," he replied calmly. A ripple of murmurs passed through the audience. Whoopi raised an eyebrow. "Well, let's jump right in then." The first question seemed harmless enough, about economic inequality and opportunity. Whoopi framed it confidently, with the tone of someone accustomed to steering conversations toward familiar conclusions. Sowell listened without interruption. He didn't nod. He didn't frown. When she finished, he paused for a moment, long enough for the studio to fall quiet. "I think," he said slowly, "we often confuse outcomes with causes." The simplicity of the statement drew attention like a magnet. He continued, his voice steady and unhurried. "When we see unequal outcomes, the temptation is to assign blame to systems without examining incentives, behaviors, and unintended consequences. Economics is not about intentions. It's about results." One of the co-hosts shifted in her seat. The audience leaned forward. Whoopi interjected quickly, "But aren't you ignoring historical context? Discrimination, power imbalances?" Sowell turned toward her, not confrontationally, but attentively, like a professor addressing a student. "Not at all," he replied. "History matters, but it must be understood accurately. When we reduce complex histories to slogans, we replace understanding with emotion, and emotion is a poor substitute for evidence." A few audience members applauded. Others exchanged uneasy glances. Whoopi's smile tightened. "So you're saying people are just emotional?" "I'm saying," Sowell corrected gently, "that policy built on emotion often harms the very people it claims to help." The words landed heavier than their volume suggested. The conversation intensified. Whoopi leaned forward now, elbows on the table. "But when people are struggling, when systems fail them, don't we have a moral obligation to intervene?" Sowell nodded. "We do. But morality without competence is cruelty. If an intervention makes us feel virtuous while making life harder for others, we must have the courage to admit failure." The studio went silent. A camera briefly cut to Whoopi's face. Her composure flickered, not anger yet, but irritation. She was used to debates where passion overwhelmed logic. Sowell wasn't giving her that opening. "You make it sound so simple," she said sharply. "But real life isn't a textbook." Sowell's eyes softened. "I grew up poor, in segregated neighborhoods. I assure you, my views were not formed in textbooks alone." That sentence changed the temperature in the room. For the first time, Whoopi hesitated. The audience reacted audibly, some gasps, some applause. The usual rhythm of the show had been disrupted. This wasn't a guest playing defense. This was someone calmly dismantling assumptions brick by brick. One co-host attempted to lighten the mood with a joke, but it fell flat. The conversation had moved into deeper territory. Whoopi tried again, her voice rising slightly. "But don't you think your arguments give cover to people who don't care about inequality at all?" Sowell didn't flinch. If someone misuses an argument to justify indifference, that reflects on them, not on the truth of the argument itself. Suppressing ideas because they might be misused is how societies stop thinking. A murmur of approval spread through the crowd. Whoopi exhaled sharply, pushing back in her chair. "I just think you're underestimating how angry people are." "Anger?" Sowell replied evenly, "Is understandable. But it is not a strategy." That was the moment, the subtle shift where frustration crept visibly into Whoopi's expression. Her voice grew louder, her gestures sharper. "So what? People should just accept things as they are." "No," Sowell said, unshaken. "They should challenge ideas rigorously. Including mine." The audience applauded again, louder this time. Whoopi glanced toward the camera, then back at Sowell. The control she normally wielded so effortlessly felt slippery now. She wasn't losing the argument loudly, but quietly, inexorably. As the segment break music began to play, the host announced they would continue the discussion after commercials. But everyone in the studio knew something had already happened. The calm scholar hadn't raised his voice, hadn't insulted anyone, hadn't dodged a single question. And yet, the foundation of the conversation, long assumed to be unshakable, was beginning to crack. Whoopi removed her glasses, rubbing her temples briefly as the cameras cut away. Across the table, Thomas Sowell sat exactly as he had at the start, calm, composed, and patiently waiting. The storm, it seemed, was just beginning. The studio didn't erupt the way producers always expected it to after a moment. There was no applause sign lighting up, no commercial music barging in to rescue anyone. Instead, there was a thick, unfamiliar quiet, the kind that settles only after something irreversible has happened. Whoopi Goldberg sat back in her chair, hands folded now, jaw set. The earlier heat in her voice was gone, replaced by something colder and more dangerous, restraint. Cameras caught the shift immediately. This wasn't defiance anymore, it was calculation. Thomas Sowell remained still. He didn't smile, he didn't gloat, he didn't look around to see whether the audience had sided with him. He simply waited, as if silence itself were part of the argument, its final, unavoidable conclusion. Joy Behar tried to laugh it off. "Well," she said too quickly, leaning toward the table, "that's certainly one way to avoid answering." "I answered," Sowell said calmly. His voice wasn't louder than hers. It didn't need to be. "You asked whether my ideas harm people," he continued. "I explained that ideas don't harm people. Policies do. And policies survive only when discussion is replaced by outrage." Joy opened her mouth, then closed it again. For once, the usual rhythm was gone. The familiar pattern, provocation, interruption, applause, had broken. A producer's voice crackled faintly in Whoopi's earpiece. "Wrap it up." Whoopi ignored it. "Dr. Sowell," she said, carefully, "now, you're suggesting that this show, this platform, discourages honest debate." "I'm suggesting," Sowell replied, turning his gaze toward her at last, "that you confuse moral certainty with moral superiority." A collective intake of breath rippled through the studio audience. Whoopi's eyes narrowed. "That's a serious accusation. So is accusing people of cruelty without evidence," he said. But seriousness has never stopped that before. This time, even the audience didn't know how to react. No clapping, no boos, just heads turning, as if viewers were watching a tennis match where the ball had suddenly vanished. Sonny Hostin leaned forward. "Are you saying lived experience doesn't matter?" "I'm saying," Sowell replied, "that lived experience explains perspective, not truth. Truth requires comparison, evidence, and the humility to accept that you might be wrong." The word humility hung in the air like a challenge. Whoopi exhaled slowly. "You know," she said, "people at home are watching this, and they might feel dismissed." "Then I would encourage them," Sowell said gently, "to ask whether feeling dismissed is worse than never being taken seriously in the first place." The control room was in panic now. Red lights blinked. A countdown timer appeared on the studio monitor. 30 seconds. Joy tried one last time. "So you're basically saying everyone here is part of the problem?" Sowell turned to her, his expression unchanged. "No," he said, "I'm saying you're capable of being part of the solution, if you ever stop mistaking disagreement for danger." The timer hit 10 seconds. Whoopi forced a smile toward the camera. "Well, that's all the time we have today." She hesitated, just a fraction too long, then added, "Drive." Thomas Sowell. The credits rolled, but the story didn't end there. Backstage, the hallway buzzed with whispers. Staff members stood frozen near equipment carts, phones already out, replaying clips that were spreading faster than anyone could track. Whoopi walked briskly toward her dressing room, sunglasses on, jaw tight. A producer caught up to her. "That went sideways," he said. She stopped. "No," she replied quietly. "That went honest." Down the hall, Thomas Sowell adjusted his coat as a young intern approached him, nervous. "Dr. Sowell," she said, I just wanted to say, I've never seen anything like that. He smiled faintly. That's because people don't fear disagreement anymore, he said. They fear calm. Outside the studio, a small group of reporters waited. Microphones lifted the moment he appeared. Dr. Sowell, did you come on the show intending to confront them? He paused, then shook his head. I came to answer questions, he said. What happened after that was not my decision. Do you think The View owes you an apology? Someone asked. No, he replied. They owe their audience respect. By evening, clips flooded social media. This is what real debate looks like. He didn't raise his voice once. They tried to shout him down, and failed. Even critics admitted something felt different. Whoopi watched the replay alone that night, the sound turned low. She didn't look angry, she looked thoughtful. Joy Behar, meanwhile, went silent online for the first time in years. And Thomas Sowell, he returned to his study, sat at his desk, and began